Thanks very much, George. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a romp of 8 slides through the question of will revalidation lead to better doctors. The starting point of revalidation was the Bristol heart scandal, and this is the front cover of the BMJ in the week that our professional conduct hearings into the cardiac surgeons at Bristol ended. And Richard Smith, the editor of the BMJ then, in his editorial, quoting from W.B. Yeats, said, "All change utterly. British medicine will be transformed by the Bristol case." And it was the Bristol case that kick-started revalidation. And a month after this editorial was published, the then president of the GMC wrote to the Medical Royal Colleges and the BMA and basically said, we cannot go on like this. It was not just Bristol, however, because what he knew was in the pipeline were a number of cases which were going to achieve a high public profile, particularly individual doctors, of whom only 2 are shown here, who were known to be bad doctors. And the way that their medical colleagues handled that was either to ignore it or to write excellent references on them so they moved on to be somebody else's problem. And that, taken together with Bristol, where doctors were working beyond their competence, other doctors knew and looked the other way, and the one doctor who raised the alarm was ostracized. That all taken together convinced the GMC at the time that professional self-regulation had failed too often and too spectacularly, and something needed to change. We also, of course, work in a very challenging litigious environment now. These are the complaints to the GMC over the 5-year period shown on the slide, and the total number of complaints between 2007 and 2011 went up by nearly 70%. We live in a world where the public would not understand if we doctors were not willing to show that we're up to date and fit to practice. The public would not get it. And so revalidation is an inescapable fact of life. Although the total number of complaints is the sort of eye-catcher here, the actually significant number is related to the persons acting in a public capacity who are mainly medical directors, also police and coroners, but mainly medical directors. And referrals to us by medical directors have gone up 3-fold in 5 years. The significance of that is that these are the serious ones. These are the really serious complaints to us. And in my view, revalidation was having an impact even before it began, because what it was doing was driving improvements in clinical governance, driving improvements in appraisal, and bringing out from under the carpet, as it were, seriously problematic doctors. So I think revalidation has already been having an impact for 3, 4, maybe 5 years. To some extent, you could argue, and I would agree with you, that the architecture of revalidation is doing what we all do anyway. CME, I mean, you're here, this is part of your CME. Audit, as surgeons, you will have done loads of audit. You may not have done a lot of 360-degree appraisal or multi-source feedback. But the essence, the architecture of revalidation, of these things feeding into appraisal, which then feeds into revalidation, is what we're doing anyway. And I agree with that. What revalidation is doing is making it all very explicit and ensuring that the doctors that don't turn up at these sort of meetings are also required to go through the same process of CME and audit and appraisal and so on. It's the explicitness of it which revalidation is requiring. What does multi-source feedback add? Well, we can all improve on our practice. We know at the GMC that most doctors in this country are really good doctors. I'm sure this person isn't a surgeon. I'm sure they're not. Most doctors in this country are really good. And I had my first 360-degree appraisal over 10 years ago now, and it was reassuring and eye-opening, I think, in equal measure. Most of your 360-degree feedback will be incredibly positive. But you'll also learn things, either learn things about yourself that really and truly you know, or learn things about yourself that really are news to you. And we've piloted multi-source feedback very extensively. Thousands of doctors have gone through our pilots. And even the skeptics at the end of it thought, yeah, I did learn something constructive that enabled me to reflect on and improve my practice. So we are very persuaded on the basis of that and other work that multi-source feedback, once in 5 years, is worth doing. Will revalidation add value? Well, these are the nature of complaints that the GMC receives. Clinical care is at the top of the list, but they're a very significant representation of other stuff. Probity is extremely common reason to refer doctors to us. Relationship with patients, and this is not necessarily the sort of headline-grabbing stuff that you read in the newspapers. This can be a doctor who is technically good but unbelievably rude, this kind of thing. Working with colleagues, we just wish this was all handled locally. We are the nuclear option after all, and so often we wish that some heads would bang together locally. And then health issues. Now, revalidation, in our view, or the architecture that underpins revalidation, the annual appraisal and so on and so forth, should be identifying a lot of these issues much earlier than perhaps they are surfacing at the moment. And we all know that the earlier you identify an issue, the more likely it is that you will be able to resolve it. And that is in everyone's interest. It's in the patient's interest and the doctor's interest to identify and resolve problems early. So, what do we expect from revalidation? We expect two things. We genuinely expect that problem doctors will be identified earlier. And that is, I think, our top expectation. We're also very hopeful that having identified a problem, it will be resolved locally. And we now employ people that we're rather clumsily called employment liaison advisors, who are out and about throughout the UK, meeting medical directors, advising them how to handle individual cases. Yes, this is one for the GMC. No, you really ought to try and sort this one locally. This is what you should do. This is how I advise you to do this. But most doctors are very good. And we're also hoping that what revalidation will do is ensure that good doctors will improve still further. Can I look you in the eye this morning and say revalidation will definitely lead to better doctors? No, I can't. But we are going to be carrying out all sorts of research and audit and analysis to answer that question. Clearly, we're going to review the revalidation recommendations we get, and particularly those which recommend that a doctor should not be revalidated. We will be taking a strong interest in. We're going to identify the patterns that we see in terms of those doctors who are deferred or recommended not to be relicensed by organization and specialty and all this sort of stuff. And then we're going to commission research, and we don't do research ourselves. One of the things that you may not know about the GMC is that we do commission lots of research. We spend something like $1 million a year, your money, on research. And we will be commissioning research to evaluate the impact of revalidation. And very significant there, since April 2006, we have recorded all the complaints that have come to us, whether they get turned around and rejected in 2 weeks or whether they end up with a doctor being struck off. We've recorded in great detail all the complaints we get in a form that can be analyzed by SPSS and other packages of that sort. And so we have a very long, substantial reference point that we can use to look at the impact of reval, the patterns of complaints. Do we get a different nature of complaint? Are we getting less complaints and so on? And we'll also be developing and strengthening the process. We're absolutely committed to it being pragmatic, but it can improve, it will improve, and I'm sure 5 to 10 years from now, revalidation will look somewhat different to the way it looks now. So that was, as I said, a bit of a romp through, but I'm conscious that time is of the essence this morning. But that's a sort of headline the headlines of where we are at the GMC with revalidation at the moment.